The first-class ticket and the silent challenge. The sky over Chicago on a blazing June afternoon shimmered with heat waves rising from the asphalt, making the ground seem to smoke. Amid the chaotic symphony of flight announcements, the dragging clatter of luggage and the hurried footsteps, O'Hare International Airport resembled a miniature city, busy, noisy, and unforgiving. In that sea of people, Marcus Tate moved with a different, quiet gravity. His battered leather jacket, worn-out sneakers, and frayed jeans all silently told a story of the road he had traveled. No flash, no noise, only the brutal perseverance of 12-hour shifts in machine shops, the shriek of grease under calloused hands, and lonely freezing nights with only a battered radio for company. But today Marcus gripped something tightly. A first-class ticket. A ticket that 5 years ago, back when he was still fixing cars in a rundown garage, seemed like nothing more than the far-fetched dream of someone born on the wrong side of the city. That ticket wasn't a gift. It was bought with the exhaustion of a youth drained dry, countless rejections swallowed in silence, and the sting of insults hurled only because of the color of his skin. Each step toward Gate B12 felt like a journey through layers of heavy memories. The days Marcus waited outside bank offices after loan rejections, the nights staring at a leaky ceiling, wondering whether he was wasting his entire life chasing an impossible dream. And today, he was here. Not to show off, but to prove to himself. Gate B12 opened. The loudspeaker blared, inviting first-class passengers to board. Marcus took a deep breath. His rough hand handed the ticket to the young female attendant. She glanced at him, her expression briefly betraying a flicker of unhidden surprise, then reluctantly nodded. That look Marcus had seen all his life. A silent question. "What are you doing here?" But he was used to it. He walked the jet bridge with steady step, like a warrior heading into battle, needing neither recognition nor welcome. At the same time, at the far end of the lounge, Victor Langston swept onto the stage of life like a tardy king. A gray-tailored suit hugged his straight back. His Italian leather shoes gleamed under every fluorescent light. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch, worth more than a public school teacher's annual salary, glinted with every step, subtly reminding the world of his place atop the social food chain. Victor Langston, the name synonymous with luxury skyscrapers, billion-dollar contracts, and ruthless corporate takeovers. He was used to entering any room without asking for permission, used to the admiring gazes, and even more used to the silent power bestowed by money. So when Victor's gaze fell upon Marcus, with his battered jacket and faded shoes, standing at the first-class gate, a small fire ignited in his chest. Contempt. Like a predator scenting something foreign in its domain, Victor immediately decided this intruder needed to be taught a lesson, not loudly, not crudely, but with the sharpest, deepest cuts through silent, ruthless humiliation. Marcus found his seat, 2A by the window. He sank into it, the soft leather wrapping around him like a tender embrace he had never known. Cool air from the vent kissed the back of his neck. The low hum of the engines thrummed like the heartbeat of a giant, steady and strong. He placed his small bag under the seat in front, pulled out a worn notebook, the one where he recorded dreams of opening the 16th, 17th branch of his humble auto repair chain. Outside, ground staff bustled, loading luggage. The Chicago sky gradually deepened into a blazing orange, as if celebrating a new beginning. Marcus smiled faintly, closed his eyes, and let the peace soak into his every cell. But peace was never something meant for people like Marcus Tate. A loud crash echoed through the cabin. A heavy suitcase slammed into the overhead compartment. Marcus opened his eyes. Victor Langston, striding like a conqueror, hurled his suitcase into the storage bin with a scowl, as if the space were too small for someone of his stature. Victor dropped heavily into seat 2B, right beside Marcus, and accidentally, or perhaps intentionally, let his elbow invade Marcus's armrest. No apology, no glance, only the thick, arrogant aura of expensive cologne wafted directly into his neighbor's face. Marcus shifted slightly, turning his gaze out the window, choosing silence. But Victor did not choose silence. A voice rang out, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "Times rave changed, huh? Looks like anyone can make it into first class these days." The words weren't aimed just at Marcus. They were dropped like a small sonic bomb meant to ripple judgment across the cabin. Marcus gripped the armrest, knuckles whitening. But he didn't turn around. He had grown up facing jabs like this, implied messages that he wasn't good enough, didn't belong here. And he also knew that sometimes silence cut sharper than any reply. The airplane doors began to close. The flight attendants' voices instructed passengers to fasten their seatbelts. The first-class cabin dimmed under soft lights. The engines rumbled, readying the Boeing 777 to hurl itself into the sky. But right then, amid the luxury, among the soft laughter of businessmen, the clinking of wine glasses, and the faint aroma of gourmet meals, a silent battle had begun. Marcus closed his eyes. Victor smirked. Each man, standing on his battlefield, one fighting to protect a lifetime of hard-earned pride. The other was fighting to preserve the illusion that he alone deserved the world. None of the other passengers knew yet. They were about to witness a flight they would never forget. The first spark on a seemingly peaceful sky. The Boeing 777 quietly rolled onto the runway, its wheels hissing softly against the pitch-black tarmac. The evening sky cast a layer of pink-golden light over the aircraft's vast wings, bathing the first-class cabin in warm hues, where passengers lounged as if the entire world existed solely to serve them. The engines began to growl, vibrating lightly underfoot as the plane gathered speed for takeoff. Inside the cabin, everything seemed almost perfect. The gentle golden lights, the champagne glasses sparkling in the hands of elegant ladies and gentlemen, the murmur of polite conversations punctuated by occasional soft laughter. But amid that false perfection, in seats 2A and 2B, a storm was brewing, silent but unstoppable. Marcus Tate sat upright, seatbelt fastened, eyes gently closed. He focused on the sensations of the moment, the whistling wind outside the fuselage, the invisible weight pressing against his chest as the aircraft roared off the ground, then the smooth shift of the engines as the plane arched into the open sky. He wanted to memorize this moment, to mark it as a milestone in his journey, not to boast, but to remind himself, all the toil, humiliation, and countless falls, it was all worth it. He was flying, truly flying, soaring through the skies that once felt like an invisible barrier to a black boy who had grown up in the south side of Chicago. In the seat beside him, Victor Langston sneered, his gaze cold and sharp as steel. A restless feeling boiled in his chest, a turbulent blend of disdain and a shapeless jealousy. He hated the peace on Marcus's face. He hated that Marcus carried himself as if he belonged there. He hated everything Marcus represented, someone who shouldn't have had the chance, yet had quietly risen, a fight Victor had never needed to face. Victor had been born into privilege. He had never had to fight for anything beyond his bloated ego. The longer he stared at Marcus resting calmly, the more Victor's insides churned, and he decided he would extinguish that silent pride, right here, right on this flight. No shouting, no crude actions, just a few well-timed nods, a few ambiguous remarks. And soon this first-class cabin would turn against Marcus like a pack of wolves circling a lost lamb. About 20 minutes after takeoff, as the plane leveled off at a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, a soft ding sounded, the signal that passengers could remove their seatbelts. Marcus opened his eyes. A warm, muted light flooded the cabin. A young flight attendant, her blonde hair neatly tied back, her smile professionally polished, pushed a beverage cart down the aisle, offering drinks to each passenger. Victor gestured, accepting a glass of strong liquor, reclining with the ease of someone lounging in his multi-million-dollar penthouse. He sipped his drink, pretending to study financial charts on the iPad resting on his tray table, but half his mind was busy plotting. Then, with a move so deft it was almost artful, Victor slipped a $50 bill from his wallet. He folded it neatly, concealing it in his palm, waiting for the perfect moment. Marcus, meanwhile, was engrossed in the notes inside his worn notebook, drafting plans for a new garage showroom he intended to open in Miami. He had no idea about the daggered gaze aimed silently at him. Victor shifted in his seat, adjusting himself casually, then, in a flash, slipped the folded bill into the narrow gap between Marcus's seat and the cabin wall. No one saw a thing. Not a soul. Only Victor remained, smirking with smug satisfaction. The trap was set. Just a few minutes later, Victor made his move. He set his drink down, rummaged through his jacket pockets with a show of increasing agitation. The way he fidgeted and muttered drew glances from nearby passengers. Then, Victor shot up from his seat. His voice shattered the tranquil atmosphere like a cracked bell. "What the hell?" "My money's gone." Instant whispers rippled through the cabin like waves crashing ashore. An elderly lady in a red suit frowned. An old man with silver hair lowered his newspaper and looked up, intrigued. Dozens of eyes began scanning the surroundings. "I'm sure I had $50 in my wallet. Now it's gone," Victor exclaimed, purposely casting a meaningful glance at Marcus. The cabin, once a haven of luxury, suddenly felt like an invisible courtroom. And Marcus, with his battered leather jacket and worn-out sneaker, quickly became the accused. Marcus lifted his head, motionless. No one had to say a word. He could feel the burning stares slicing into him, eyes questioning, eyes judging. In that moment, Marcus felt like he was 10 years old again, standing alone on a school playground, surrounded by white kids pointing and whispering. He clenched his hands tightly around the armrests, the veins on his knuckles popping white. But he said nothing. If he spoke now, he knew his voice would tremble, and they would take that as a sign of guilt. Silence. Endurance. Those were the only weapons Marcus had left. The lead flight attendant quickly approached, her face masked with a polite but stiff smile, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "Sir, what seems to be the problem?" she asked. Victor, putting on a show of wounded pride, replied, "I lost my money. And I haven't left this seat since boarding. Someone decided to help themselves." He cast another loaded glance at Marcus. The attendant turned to Marcus, her professional smile now painfully rigid. "Sir, I'm very sorry, but for security reasons, we'll need to inspect your seat area." A polite request in words, but a command in reality. And already the surrounding passengers' eyes were like a silent jury, ready to deliver a verdict. Marcus took a deep breath. From the moment he stepped onto this plane, he knew. The world was always ready to convict him before ever hearing a word he said. And now that old test was repeating itself. He nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact with Victor. The man now reclining leisurely, smiling as if watching a high-class entertainment performance. As the flight attendant bent down to search, her hand brushed against the $50 bill hidden in Marcus's seat. As murmurs rose like an encroaching tide, as dozens of sharpened eyes stabbed at him like daggers, Marcus knew. The nightmare had only just begun. Convicted without evidence. The gentle hum of the engines outside no longer reached Heiress Tate's ears. All he could hear now was the frantic beating of his own heart, the rhythm of humiliation. the rhythm of a rage swallowed deep inside. The Boeing 777 glided smoothly through layers of silvery gray clouds, slicing the flawless sky like a fine blade. But inside the first-class cabin, what should have been a peaceful haven, a silent courtroom had been erected. And Marcus Tate, the man with the battered leather jacket, stood alone at the defendant's stand. The lead flight attendant hesitated, crouching before the small backpack at Marcus's feet. Beneath her thick mascara, her eyes glimmered with a mix of sympathy and fear. Fear of making a mistake, fear of losing her job if she didn't follow protocol. Marcus knew this. He didn't blame her. He blamed the world, the kind of world where a worn-out jacket could weigh as heavily as a guilty verdict. He reminded himself to stay calm. He knew that a single wrong move, even a glance too sharp, could immediately brand him a potential threat in their eyes, and he couldn't let that happen. Not after all he had fought for. "Excuse me, sir," the attendant whispered, her voice as soft as an apology, before unzipping the backpack. Marcus sat motionless, his hands neatly folded on his knees, his gaze turned out the window like a stranger watching a world that had already turned its back on him. One by one, the attendant pulled out the contents of the backpack, an old frayed leather notebook, a folder of documents, contracts with a new supplier in Miami, a scratched silver pen, a neatly folded dress shirt, and finally, the crumpled $50 bill, wedged among the papers. No one said a word. No one needed to. The sudden silence in the cabin spoke volumes. Whispers rippled through the rows. An elderly woman in a red blazer, sitting 3 rows back, leaned toward her companion and murmured, "Knew it. Just look at the way he's dressed." A middle-aged man with a bulging gut and a sports t-shirt shook his head and sighed in disappointment. A young woman in a hoodie slyly pulled out her phone, snapping a photo of Marcus with a smirk curling at her lips. In that moment, Marcus felt the very air around him thick, nangine, becoming suffocating. He was no longer Marcus Tate, successful businessman, the builder of one of the largest garage chains in South Chicago. He was just a black man caught with $50 in his backpack, and in their eyes that was enough for conviction. No trial needed. No defense required. Victor Langston leaned back, his mouth curling into a faint, victorious smirk. He tapped his unfinished glass of liquor lightly, producing a cold, sharp ting that sliced through the tense atmosphere like a blade. Marcus caught that look, the look of a man who knew he had twisted the truth with nothing more than a whispered accusation. For a fleeting moment, a part of Marcus wanted to stand up, to shout, to expose everything right then and there. But he restrained himself, because he knew, in this game the one who lost control was the one who lost everything. The lead attendant hesitated, holding the crumpled $50 bill as if it were scalding hot. We'll have to report this to the chief purser. When we land, airport security will be waiting," she said. Her words, though wrapped in the gentlest language, slammed into Marcus like a heavy gavel striking down judgment. He nodded slightly. No argument, no outrage. Just a nod, with a calmness so unnerving, it chilled the air around him, like a warrior who knew that fighting now would only seal his defeat. The attendant stepped away. The backpack was left in front of Marcus, an unspoken damning piece of evidence. Around him, the passengers pretended to be busy. The man in the sports t-shirt buried himself in his phone. The elderly woman fussed with her handbag, avoiding his gaze. The young woman peeked at her phone screen, suppressing a giggle. They didn't need an explanation. In their eyes, everything was already clear as day. And Marcus, the man who had earned his first-class ticket through sweat and sacrifice, now seemed nothing more than a stain in the luxurious fabric of the cabin. The Boeing continued its smooth course at 35,000 feet, slicing through a glittering ocean of clouds under the setting sun. But for Marcus Tate, the world had changed colors. The sky was no longer a sea of freedom. It was a giant cage, trapping him amid prejudice, humiliation, and solitude. He turned his face toward the window, his eyes tracing the swirling white clouds outside, like souls writhing beneath an invisible storm. In the highest, deepest, most lavish place, Marcus Tate remained just a stranger in their eyes. And they would never care about the truth. Only a story that neatly fit the prejudice they had long chosen to believe. When the whole world turns its back. The air in the first-class cabin grew so heavy it felt like a mere touch could shatter it into razor-sharp shards. The steady hum of the plane's engines persisted outside, the aircraft gliding smoothly through cottony layers of cloud. But inside this Boeing 777, Marcus Tate felt himself being pushed deeper into a suffocating space with no escape. He sat upright, hands clasped on his lap, eyes fixed straight out the window. Yet he knew. Every breath he took was being scrutinized by the entire cabin. Across the aisle, the man in the sports t-shirt and bulging belly inhaled sharply, before shifting to the very edge of his seat, inching away from Marcus, as if avoiding a contagious disease. A few rows down, the woman in the red blazer rummaged through her handbag, pulling out a small bottle of hand sanitizer, spraying it liberally onto her palms, stealing nervous glances at Marcus before hastily turning away. A young woman, no more than 20, clutched her Gucci handbag tightly to her chest, fingers gripping the strap as if it might vanish into thin air at any moment. The glances, the sidelong looks, the shrinking gestures, no one said a word, but all of it screamed a silent, deafening message. You don't belong here. Marcus could feel every thudding beat of his heart pounding against his ribcage. A part of him wanted to rise, to shout, to confront every face turning away from him. What do you know about me? Is a crumpled $50 bill enough to convict a man? But he didn't, because he understood, long ago, that in this world the truth mattered far less than the convenience of prejudice. And at this moment they needed a simple story, a villain to blame, a stain to scrub away, so they could feel clean again. And Marcus had been chosen. Victor Langston, the architect of this vile theater, still sat there, calmly savoring his glass of whiskey like a king observing the fall of an enemy. He leaned back in a seat, letting his gaze drift over Marcus, a thin smile tugging at his lips. That smirk needed no explanation. It said, "See?" All it took was a whisper at the right time, and the world would crush you, Marcus Tate. Victor poured himself another drink, swirling the amber liquid gently, the golden cabin lights catching and scattering across the glass like little fireworks. The cabin now felt like an arena. Every movement Marcus made, even a slight shift, was watched like a potential threat. Every flicker of discomfort was read as guilt. He was no longer a passenger. He had become an object, a foreign, troublesome thing, labeled dangerous simply for existing. The lead flight attendant returned, holding a handwritten report in trembling hands, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. "I'm sorry, sir, but we need your signature acknowledging the personal property inspection for the captain's report." Her voice quivered. She knew this was wrong, but the damned procedure allowed her to hide behind an invisible curtain. Marcus took the pen. His hands were dry and rough. As the tip touched the paper, he realized, never before had such a simple action carried so much humiliation. He signed. Each letter was carved into the paper like a blade across his soul. Almost immediately, Victor struck again. While Marcus was still gathering himself, Victor subtly reached under Marcus's seat, dragging out his carry-on bag. With the dexterity of a seasoned pickpocket, Victor rifled through it. In a flash, he planted an old wallet he had prepared earlier, containing a few crumpled bills and a credit card in someone else's name. Then he slid the bag back into place as if it had never been touched. No one noticed. No cameras caught a thing. And this time, Victor smirked. Done. The next blow will be the fatal one. Less than 5 minutes later, Victor sat up straight, raising his voice loudly enough for the cabin to hear. "My wallet's missing!" And I just saw that guy messing with stuff. The cabin exploded. Shocked glances, horrified whispers. Heads snapped around, eager to join the chorus without needing proof. A man in a black suit across the aisle blurted out, "I saw him bending over the seat." A woman in a green dress mumbled, "I heard a zipper." They didn't need evidence, just an excuse, and Victor had served it up perfectly. The lead flight attendant hurried over again. This time there was no hesitation. She crouched, pulled out Marcus's carry-on bag under the collective stare of the entire cabin. Her fingers trembled as she unzipped it. And when the unfamiliar battered wallet tumbled onto the plush carpet, the murmuring erupted into a full-blown chorus of condemnation. "There it is again!" Typical. Unbelievables in first class, no less. Marcus sat frozen. He no longer had the strength to protest. Any word he spoke now would only drag him deeper into the quicksand of their assumptions. In their eyes, he was already a thief, a question mark to be erased, an unease to be eliminated, and nothing could change that now. Victor reclined in his seat, eyes closed, a thin, drawn-out smile across his pale face under the cold yellow lights. He exhaled slowly, thinking. It's over. Marcus Tate, the man who once strode proudly into first class full of hope, was now reduced to a silent, shrunken ghost in the very world he had once dared to dream of. And the flight to Miami had only just begun. Handcuffed in the sky. The engines of the Boeing roared steadily as the plane pierced through thick layers of cloud. Outside, the sky darkened into a deep velvet night, with only a few scattered, lonely stars blinking faintly. But for Marcus Tate, the darkness wasn't outside. It had already flooded the first-class cabin, and it was swallowing him whole, bit by bit. The lead flight attendant stood before Marcus, gripping her radio tightly as if clinging to it to steady her nerves. Beside her, a tall, heavily built male flight attendant stood at rigid attention, muscles bulging beneath his Navy uniform, his eyes sharp and wary. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an object. A pair of white plastic restraints, specialized zip ties used by flight crews in emergencies, recognized them the moment the dim cabin light caught their sheen. And his heart clenched in an invisible fist. The cabin shuddered with collective realization. Whispers erupted like a hive broken open. "They're going to cuff him." "Oh my God, he must be dangerous." Unbelievable. Looked decent enough, but turns out. The glances sharpened into invisible spears, aimed squarely at Marcus. The young woman in the hoodie, the one who had earlier snapped a photo of him, was now live streaming. Her camera shook slightly as she recorded a black man being handcuffed in the most luxurious space on the plane. A short story. Easy to understand. Easy to consume. No one needed the truth. The image alone was enough. The lead attendant swallowed hard, her voice trembling but firm. "Mr. Tate, for the safety of our passengers, we must ask for your cooperation." Marcus looked her straight in the eye. No anger, no pleading. Only a deep, silent pain as vast as an abyss. He understood. They no longer saw a man in him. Only a threat. A threat to be contained. A threat to be locked away. Marcus slowly extended his hands forward, palms up, without the slightest resistance. A slow, deliberate motion. A bitter surrender. The male attendant stepped forward, gripped Marcuse's wrist tightly, and pulled the restraints taut. The ties made a dry, snapping sound as they tightened. The sharp bite of plastic against his skin reverberated through Marcus's mind like the sound of something sacred shattering. His pride. Somewhere across the aisle, Victor Langston's derisive chuckle rang out. He no longer bothered to hide it. He lounged back in his seat, swirling the liquor in his glass, his eyes gleaming triumphantly as he watched Marcus, like a beast finally chained. Marcus lowered his head, his broad shoulders trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from humiliation. A kind of humiliation too profound for words. The first-class cabin buzzed with a strange, poisonous blend of emotions, tension, satisfaction, and barely concealed glee. Around him, some passengers chuckled mockingly. Some nudged their companions, whispering vicious remarks. Some sneakily filmed, their eyes sparkling with the thrill of witnessing a live, unscripted spectacle. No one remembered that just hours ago they had smiled at Marcus as he boarded. No one remembered that he too was a paying customer, that he too had dreams, goals, and sacrifices no different from theirs. All that remained in their eyes now was a disruptive black man handcuffed in first class. The lead flight attendant stepped back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She wasn't a bad person. She was just another cog in a system built to crush men like Marcus, a system that didn't need evidence. Only someone who fits the crowd's subconscious fears. And Marcus, with his brown skin, worn jacket, and resolute eyes, was perfect for the role. The plane glided steadily through the clouds, the cold moonlight illuminating the scene inside the cabin. Marcus sat still, his hands bound tightly before him. His body trembled, not with fear, with the feeling of being trampled, of being suffocated, of having everything stripped away by a few cold glances and a false accusation. Victor leaned over to the man in the sports t-shirt beside him and muttered, "Thought he was somebody. Turns out he's just a thief." The man laughed loudly, slapping his thigh with a resounding thwack of triumph. The sound echoed in the cabin like a whip crack across Marcus's back. He clenched his fists so tightly the restraints bit into his palms, drawing blood. But he did not bow his head. Not once, even if the whole world turned against him. Their stares were full of contempt. Even if Victor Langston's mocking laughter slithered through his every nerve like a poisonous sweetness, Marcus Tate would not bow his head, not ever. Somewhere in the distance, the flight crew's radio crackled to life, relaying to the captain, "We have the disruptive passenger secured. Request airport security presence upon landing." A sentence had been passed, a jail cell awaited below, and a reputation had been smeared midway between heaven and earth. But amid the deepest anguish, amid the roar of the engines, the hissing of the wind against the fuselage, the click of cameras, the whispers, the live streams, the sneers, Marcus made a vow. He swore that if he had even a single breath left, he would rise. If there was even the faintest hope, he would reclaim the truth. If there was even one chance, he would show them all who he truly was. Not a name on a criminal report, not a face splashed across tabloid live streams, but a man, a warrior. A man who had once dared to walk into the world with his head held high, and this time he would do it louder, stronger, fiercer than ever before. When the first light pierced the darkness, the plane hurtled through the night like a solitary arrow. At 35,000 feet, the world outside was an endless sea of clouds, bathed in cold, distant moonlight. But inside the first-class cabin, the chill didn't come from nature. It radiated from sneering glances, from whispered conversations hidden behind sleeves, from the way the cabin shrank away from Marcus Tate as if he were some dangerous contagion. Marcus sat upright in seat 2A, his hands bound tightly before him by the white plastic restraints. His shoulders trembled, not from cold, humiliation, and a deep burning loneliness consumed his chest. He took a deep breath, forcing his gaze outward through the window. With the glass, clouds rolled under the moonlight like a frozen ocean. Marcus saw himself, a tiny lost leaf adrift on that sea of ice. No anchor, no ally. Just him, fighting against a world that had rushed to condemn him without a shred of proof. Victor Langston lounged casually in seat 2B, an arrogant smile hovering on his lips. He lifted his glass of liquor, swirling it slowly like a king savoring his triumph. Every so often he leaned toward the nearby passengers, whispering, "We have to be strict. Letting people like that into first class, it's dangerous." They nodded. They murmured in agreement. They didn't need to know anything more. Hearing judgment from a man like Victor, with his expensive suit and polished IMA, was enough. In their eyes, Marcus was nothing more than a stain to be scrubbed clean. A few rows back, in seat 4C, someone sat quietly. Carla Alvarez. A small 30-something Latina woman, her thick black hair neatly twisted into a low bun. From the beginning, Carla hadn't spoken. She hadn't joined the whispers, hadn't pulled out her phone to film, hadn't cast a single scornful glance. She had simply watched and remembered. With a quiet, piercing sharpness, Carla had witnessed everything from the moment Marcus boarded the plane. She had seen the first sneer from Victor, heard the venom-laced remarks, the contemptuous smirks. She had seen Victor shift and feign shock over the missing money, and when the crumpled $50 bill was discovered with such suspicious convenience, Carla began to doubt. As Marcus was handcuffed, mocking laughter began to ripple through the cabin. But Carla didn't laugh. Her stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. She knew that feeling, the feeling of being judged by the color of your skin, the feeling of being boxed in at first glance. She had grown up with it, like an invisible scar stitched deep into her soul. And now, looking at Marcus Tate sitting there, she didn't just see a man in restraints. She saw herself. She saw her parents. She saw a whole generation crushed under the heel of prejudice. Carla shifted in her seat, reaching into her handbag to pull out an old phone. She opened the camera app, setting the screen to black to record discreetly. She angled the lens toward Victor and Marcus, her movements silent, invisible. With all the deftness that surviving tough neighborhoods had taught her, Carla began recording. Victor, too absorbed in his supposed victory, noticed nothing. He sat up, whispering to the man in the sports shirt beside him. "You know, they get spoiled." "That's the problem. No sense of discipline anymore." Soft laughter answered him. Every word, every sneer, every side-eye glance was captured by Carla's camera. She kept recording. She filmed Victor's cold, detached glances at Marcus. She filmed the other passengers whispering and giggling. She filmed Marcus's hollow, vacant eyes staring out the window, clinging to the dark sky outside as if it were his last refuge. Every moment, every act of cruelty. Carla recorded it all. A silent witness. A living piece of evidence. A blade is being sharpened quietly, ready to cut through the thick fog of lies engulfing the cabin. As the plane began to tremble slightly, signaling their descent, Carla saved the video, transferring it immediately into a secure folder. She didn't know if she would have a chance to present this evidence before airport security stormed aboard, but she knew this. If she did nothing, if she stayed silent, she would forever be part of the crowd that turned away. And Carla Alvarez, who had grown up in neighborhoods where silence meant complicity, could not accept that. Not this time, not with Marcus Tate. A few seats away, Victor adjusted his collar, oblivious. He thought he had won. He thought Marcus was crushed. He thought the world was applauding him. But he didn't know. Hidden in the silent crowd, a traitor had emerged. Someone who held the truth in her hands. Someone is ready to set fire to the darkness covering this flight with just a video, just a voice, just a moment of courage. The plane began its gradual descent, jolting gently. The lead flight attendant announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We'll be landing in Miami in approximately 30 minutes." Marcus remained where he was, wrists bound. His face was frozen in an expression of cold endurance. But deep in his eyes a fire had begun to burn. A belief, fragile but indestructible, that no matter how cruel the world could be, the truth still existed. And sometimes it only took one person willing to see it to ignite it into a blaze. In seat 4C, Carla gripped her phone tightly. Sweat slicked her palms, but she smiled, a small, determined smile. The battle was only just beginning, and she, a small, unknown woman, would be the first gust of wind to tear apart the curtain of lies. The silent battle erupts in the sky. The plane descended steadily, slicing through dense clouds, making the cabin shudder rhythmically, like a massive beast struggling against its restraints. The seatbelt sign glowed brightly. The first-class cabin, already stifling, now felt even tighter, stretched taut like a drawn bowstring. In seat 2A, Marcus Tate sat motionless. His wrists, cuffed tightly before his stomach, were swollen and reddened beneath the harsh plastic ties. The sting of public humiliation still burned fresh inside him, like a wound too raw to clot. The entire cabin was shrouded in an eerie silence. No conversations, no laughter. Only furtive glances and whispers softer than a mosquito's wings. But in seat 4C, a quiet fire had been lit. Carla Alvarez sat still, outwardly calm. Her hand rested casually on her lap, cleverly concealing her phone in her palm. On the screen, the secret footage she had captured, clearly showing Victor's vile actions, his slanderous words, and the moments Marcus was framed, was in the process of uploading, percent by percent. The weak airplane Wi-Fi made the upload excruciatingly slow. Carla bit her lip, eyes glued to the progress bar. 15%, 23%, 10%. She knew time was running out. The plane was nearing the ground. Airport security would be waiting for Marcus. If the footage didn't reach the outside world before the wheels touched down, Marcus would be arrested and the narrative would be lost forever. She stole a glance. Victor Langston still lounged comfortably in seat 2B, flicking his glass lightly, that smug smile never wavering. He had no idea. He still believed he had crushed Marcus, that his lies and Yu's dirty tricks would remain hidden. Carla clenched her hand. She thought to herself, "No one else sees it. I see it, and this time, he will pay." The progress bar crept forward. 48%, 53%, ... Carla adjusted the sharing settings, send directly to major news networks, not her account. If she posted it herself, it might take time to gain attention, but if sent straight to media outlets, with teams awake 24/7, it could explode instantly. It was her only shot. The plane jolted harder. An announcement crackled over the PA system. "Prepare for landing. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The entire cabin seemed to sag under a wave of anxious stillness. People began tidying up, sitting straighter, adjusting their clothes. Victor pulled his small carry-on from beneath his seat, casually preparing for what he thought would be his victory parade. He turned toward Marcus, snapping his fingers mockingly, smirking. "Welcome to reality, old man." Marcus didn't respond. His eyes were sharp, frozen, emotionless. But inside, a storm was brewing, waiting for the right moment to unleash. In seat 4C, Carla leaned forward, glued to her phone. The progress bar inched closer. 74%. She almost held her breath. If the clip were uploaded, everything would change. Marcus would no longer be alone. Victor would no longer control the narrative. And the truth, the only weapon the powerless could cling to, would finally break free. A few rows over, some passengers began to fidget. Something felt off. No one said it aloud. But the atmosphere had shifted. They could sense it, an invisible current weaving through the cabin. Victor sensed it, too. He frowned, glancing around. The predator's instinct in him picked up on the change, even if he couldn't name it. He narrowed his eyes at Marcus, then at the other passengers. No one was laughing now. No one was nudging each other in agreement. Even the young woman in the hoodie had stopped live streaming. They were whispering again, but this time it wasn't about Marcus. It was about Victor. In seat 4C, Carla whispered under her breath, 85%. 92%. She swallowed hard. Every second dragged like a century. The plane jolted violently, buffeted by thick clouds, almost causing her to drop her phone. But she held on tight. She couldn't let go. She couldn't lose connection. She couldn't falter. Not now. Not when Marcus sat there, hands bound, condemned by people who knew nothing about him. Victor scowled, restless. He stealthily pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly through the newsfeed. Nothing unusual. Just weather updates, boring political chatter, and a few tweets about other flights. No mention of him. No mention of Marcus. He exhaled in relief. Maybe it was just his imagination. He smiled coldly to himself, muttering, "I've already won." At that exact moment, on Carla's phone the words flashed. Checkmark upload complete. A soft ding echoed in her palm. The clip has been uploaded. It was sent. Delivered into the hands of journalists, editors, and sleepless news hounds hunting for the next big story. Carla slumped back against her seat, her heart pounding. She had done it. This small, quiet woman had thrown a stone into the still waters of innocence and complicity, and she knew. From this moment, the first ripples had begun to spread, slowly, but unstoppably. Somewhere below, in buzzing newsrooms and blinking smartphones, a headline was already forming. New evidence surfaces, racial discrimination on flight from Chicago, innocent man handcuffed. A storm was brewing, and this time, Victor Langston would have nowhere left to hide. The fateful reversal in the sky. Outside the window, the sky had begun to change. The deep black of night slowly dissolved, merging with the faint glow of dawn creeping up from the horizon. The plane roared onward in its descent into Miami, slicing through billowing clouds like silver waves. But inside the first-class cabin, the real storm had erupted, not from the engines, not from the weather, but from the phones vibrating one after another. It all started with a soft ding, the sound of a new message arriving. A passenger in seat 3B pulled out his phone, frowning. A message from a friend popped up. "Check this out now! Scandal on the Chicago-Miami flight." He opened the clip. The images flashed instantly onto his screen. Victor Langston, cold and calculated, deliberately shoving a meal tray into Marcus. Victor sneering through gritted teeth. "Stay in your lane, boy!" Victor smirking as Marcus winced in pain. No subtitles needed, no explanations. It was crystal clear. A predator and a victim. A crime laid bare before millions of eyes. The man gasped, "Oh my God!" That gasp was the spark. Other phones across the cabin lit up. Some received messages. Others saw breaking news alerts on Twitter, X, and Facebook. Push notifications flooded in from CNN, NBC, Fox News. Racial discrimination scandal on Chicago-Miami flight, shocking evidence released. Marcus Tate, the mysterious businessman humiliated in midair. Viral clip exposes Victor Langston. The young woman in the hoodie who had once live-streamed Marcus being handcuffed jumped up, opening her phone. Her eyes widened as she saw the trending headline. Number flight, injustice was now number one. The clip Carla recorded had surpassed 2 million views in less than 5 minutes, and it was rising at a dizzying pace. The atmosphere in the cabin changed in an instant. No more contemptuous stares aimed at Marcus. Now all eyes turned toward Victor Langston. Eyes of shock, eyes of anger, eyes of righteous fury. Victor, who had been adjusting his cufflinks smugly, suddenly froze. A phone screen glowed in front of him, and Victor saw his face. Not the face of a winner, but a face twisted in cruelty, exposed naked before the entire world. At the same moment, inside the cockpit, the internal radio crackled urgently. The dispatcher's voice from the ground tower barked. Direct order from the airline executive board. Passenger Marcus Tate is a major shareholder of Tate Aeronautics, our strategic partner. Cease all disciplinary measures immediately. Issue a public apology immediately. The captain's eyes widened. He spun around and barked at the lead flight attendant. Take off his restraints! Now! The lead flight attendant went pale. She and the muscular male flight attendant stumbled toward first class, racing down the aisle. They stopped in front of Marcus, their faces drained of all color. The lead flight attendant knelt, her hands trembling as she pulled out scissors and snipped through the plastic cuffs. The white ties snapped apart. Marcus's hands were free, but he didn't move immediately. He sat still, his gaze icy, steady as stone. The entire cabin held its breath. Some passengers who had gleefully joined the earlier condemnation now shrank back in their seats. The young woman in the hoodie quickly turned her phone screen away, ashamed. The man in the sports t-shirt, who had once sneered at Marcus, now fumbled awkwardly with his tie. The world had flipped, in undiminutas minutes. The lead flight attendant, sweat beading on her forehead, bowed low before Marcus. Her voice shook. Mr. Tate, we sincerely apologize for this grave misunderstanding. Please forgive our failure. The tall male flight attendant bent deeply as well, muttering, We're so sorry, sir. Victor sat frozen. His face was ashen. The glass in his hand slipped, shattering on the floor, but he didn't notice. His phone buzzed uncontrollably. Emails, texts, call after call. The parent company terminated his contract. The board demanded an internal investigation. His real estate firm issued a formal letter of dismissal. Victor Langston, the once feared real estate tycoon, was unraveling at 35,000 feet, and he knew. No one would save him this time. Nothing could shield him from the naked, unstoppable power of truth. Marcus rose slowly to his feet. The cabin was deathly silent. He walked, steady, unshaken, until he stood before Victor. No raised fists, no shouting, just one sentence, calm and heavy as a funeral bell. You picked the wrong man to cross. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang through the entire cabin, each word hammering into Victor's spine. Victor stammered, his lips trembling. We couldn't form a single coherent word. The plane began its final descent, dropping lower toward the earth. Through the tiny oval windows, Miami glittered under the rising sun, welcoming a new day. But for Victor Langston, this sunrise wasn't a beginning, it was the end. As Victor quivered in his seat, Marcus stood tall, shoulders broad and unbreakable, like a general returning from battle victorious. Some passengers fidgeted awkwardly. Others began clapping, a hesitant scattered applause at first. Then it grew. It swept through the cabin in waves. A thunderous ovation, not for the man who once sat in first class out of entitlement, but for the man who had once been handcuffed in shame, Marcus Tate, for justice. And Carla, the small woman in seat 4C, sat silently, smiling quietly to herself. Her phone still glowed in her lap. The clip she had recorded had surpassed 10 million views in under minutes, and it was still spreading like wildfire. Marcus turned back, walking slowly, proudly to his seat. He sat down, head high, eyes gazing firmly out the window. The first light of dawn streamed in, casting a radiant glow across his face. He looked like a warrior who had stepped out of the darkness. Unbowed, unbroken. The battle wasn't over. But now he knew. This time, I won't be fighting alone. The final blow of truth. The cabin lights blinked a soft yellow. The captain's warm voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land at Miami International Airport. Please fasten your seatbelts and get ready for disembarkation. A soft rustling filled the cabin as passengers adjusted their belts and checked their belongings. The heavy atmosphere had vanished. Only a stirring energy remained, and an essence of anticipation, as if everyone knew they were about to witness the opening of a new chapter. Marcus Tate sat quietly by the window, his hand gripping the armrest. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the glass, casting long shadows across his face. No more fearful glances, no more awkward shifting. Only the calm of a man who knew he had won. Won through dignity, not rage. But deep within Marcus, sharpened instincts honed over the years of hard work whispered, "Stay alert. Victor isn't done yet." And he knew. A man like Victor Langston wouldn't go down easily. Sure enough. Just a few rows away, Victor, pale-faced, eyes flashing with desperation, was still scheming. He pulled his phone from his pocket, fingers flying across the screen. A message sent to a contact simply labeled Oscar, a trusted security agent at the airport. The message read, "Target, Marcus Tate. Stage a scene, plant a weapon, or find any excuse to detain as soon as the plane lands." Victor gripped his phone tightly, heart pounding. This was his final gamble. If he couldn't flip the game now, he would be finished. The plane began to descend further. Outside, buildings grew large, and palm-lined streets basked in golden morning light. Inside the cab, tension thumbed. Everything seemed settled, or so it appeared. Except for Victor. He clenched his jaw, thinking, just one slip, just one mistake. The wheels screeched against the tarmac. A small jolt, then the engine's roar softened as the plane slowed. Crew's announcement came over the intercom. "Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop." As soon as the plane parked at the gate and the seatbelt signs went off, Victor sprang from his seat. He lunged forward, accidentally bumping hard into Marcus, shoving his shoulder roughly. A sudden clash, enough to provoke a minor scuffle, enough to trigger suspicion. And then airport security would have the justified reason to intervene. Victor smirked. This is it. My last chance. But Marcus was ready. He leaned slightly aside, effortlessly dodging the blow. At the same time, with lightning reflexes, Marcus pulled out his phone, instantly activating the front camera. In a split second, he captured Victor's act. The shove, the sly look, the smirk of malicious triumph. Not a single detail missed, not a single excuse that could erase it. Marcus held the phone steadily, walking slowly toward the door. His gaze swept across the crew, the passengers. Finally landing on Victo, who now stood frozen, realizing he'd been caught red-handed. Marcus smiled. A calm, razor-edged smile. He put his phone into his pocket, gripped his carry-on tightly. No words were necessary. His actions had already spoken loud enough. The airplane doors opened. Airport security rushed in. Leading them was Oscar, Victor's planted agent, eyes sharp, scanning for Marcus. But then, Oscar's phone vibrated. A new message from his superior. Cancel all actions against Marcus Tate. Provide him with full protection immediately. Scarar froze mid-step. He fumbled to hide his phone, stepping awkwardly aside, eyes darting away from Marcus. The battlefield had shifted completely. Victor, desperate, still tried to wriggle free. He lunged forward, sputtering, "He attacked me. I have witnesses. I have..." But the stares he met were cold, unflinching. The young woman in the hoodie shook her head in disgust. The man in the sports t-shirt turned away, ashamed. An elderly couple leaned toward each other, whispering, "Pathetic." From her seat, 4C, Carla calmly raised her phone, screen lit with clear footage. Marcus dodges Victor's attack. Victor lunges first. An undeniable piece of evidence. A security officer glanced at her screen, and without hesitation the team shifted its target. 2 officers stepped forward, not toward Marcus, but toward Victor Langston. They seized him, twisting his arms behind his back, snapping the cuffs closed. Victor howled, "What are you doing? I'm Victor Langston, But no one listened. No one cared anymore. Walked steadily down the airplane steps. The cool morning air brushed his face. No more restraints, no more accusations. Only freedom. Only the pride reclaimed by truth and courage. Behind him, Victor was dragged across the terminal, flailing like a hunted beast. His protests faded, swallowed by the awakening roar of the airport. True dawn had broken. Not just outside, but inside Marcus's soul. The dawn of truth. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the runway like a golden ribbon. The plane sat silently at Gate 17, its silver body gleaming under Miami's brilliant morning sky. Marcus Tate descended the stairs slowly. Each step, though weighed down by wounds that hadn't yet healed, the red welts from the cuffs, the burns from spilled coffee, the bruises inflicted by word, and stare Soisses steady and proud. He needed no applause, no welcome parade. Each step he took was already the quietest yet grandest triumphal march. Behind him, Victor Langston howled in madness, restrained by 3 officers. He thrashed and screamed threats. I'll sue all of you, But no one listened anymore. Victor Langston, the man who once perched atop towers of power, who once sneered at men like Marcus, was now nothing more than background noise, swept by the rising light of truth. The cold cuffs around Victor's wrists were like the chains of destiny, and for the first time in his life, he tasted absolute defeat. The automatic doors to the arrival hall slid open. A barrage of flashing lights exploded. The cameras pointed directly at the airplane's exit. Reporters jostled for position, thrusting microphones forward. "Mr. Tate, how do you feel right now? Will you sue the airline? What are your next steps?" Marcus paused, lifting his gaze toward the pale blue sky above. He drew in a deep breath, the salty, sharp scent of the sea filling his lungs. And for the first time during this entire ordeal, it smelled sweet, sweet like freedom. He looked at the reporters, at the strangers scrambling to broadcast his story. Then he looked beyond them, as if gazing past the crowd, reaching those unseen souls who would find hope in what had happened here. Marcus lifted a microphone. His voice was deep, steady, and resonant in the wide expanse of the airport terminal. "I'm not standing here today just to reclaim my dignity. I'm standing for everyone who's ever been judged by their appearance, for everyone who's been crushed under the silent weight of prejudice, And I stand here to remind you that truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath lies, will always rise again stronger than any force trying to suppress it. The airport fell silent. Then, one clap, two claps, and like a dam breaking, a thunderous standing ovation. Far back in the crowd, Carla, the small woman with the tightly tied hair and the battered old phone that had captured a moment of destiny, stood silently. She smiled, a quiet, proud smile. Marcus caught her eye. He said nothing. You've been given a slight nod, a silent thank you, deeper than 1,000 words, because if not for Carla, if not for her quiet bravery, the truth would have remained buried beneath sneers and invisible verdicts. Live news streams continued to flash across TV screens and phones. Marcus Tate, new symbol in the fight against discrimination. Horizon Airline issues, public apology, commits to full reform. Victor Langston indicted. Defamation, racial discrimination, assault, and evidence tampering. Marcus moved through the crowd, not hurried but boastful. He walked like a man who had walked through fire and emerged with his soul intact. He walked like a man, a warrior, a symbol. Behind him, Victor was swallowed by a furious swarm of cameras and condemnation. The click of the shutters bit into his skin like a needle. No number of excuses could save him now. He was shoved into the back of a police cruiser. The door slammed shut. A final resounding judgment from the court of truth. Marcus never looked back. He walked straight ahead toward the airport's exit. Morning sunlight poured in. Beyond the terminal, the ocean shimmered and the waves glittered silver. And in that moment, Marcus understood. True victory wasn't making his enemy fall. It was holding on to itself. Holding on to his faith and decency, his unwavering resolve, and the silent, indomitable strength of the truth. A young reporter sprinted after him, calling out, "Mr. Tate, if you could send a message to others facing injustice, what would you say?" Marcus stopped. He looked straight into the camera, and with a small, steady smile he answered, "Never let anyone decide your worth based on appearances. Never stay silent when you know the truth, because once the truth speaks, it will shatter every chain." He turned and continued walking. The sun rose higher, casting a bright halo around his silhouette. Marcus Tate. Once a small, underestimated figure in Victor's eyes, now a giant in the eyes of the world. Summary. The message of the entire story. The story of Marcus Tate is not merely a confrontation between two individuals on a fateful flight. It is an enduring epic of the power of truth, the strength of perseverance, and the inviolability of human dignity in the face of prejudice and injustice. Marcus boarded that flight with a simple, quiet pride. The hard-earned fruit of years spent sweating in machine shops. He carried no flashy titles, only self-respect and a humble dream, to be treated as a human being. But Victor Langston, symbolizing an entire corrupt system of arrogance, prejudice, and entitlement, attempted to crush that dignity with cruel words, petty traps, and a web of lies. Marcus endured. He was humiliated, handcuffed, judged under the cold, merciless eyes of hundreds. But he did not fall. He chose to stand firm. He chose to believe in the truth. He chose to uphold his dignity even when the world turned its back on him, and in the end the severance that sets the spark, igniting a fire that burned down the entire castle of deceit Victor had built. One phone, one authentic video, one courageous woman named Carla. That's all it took. For the truth to rise, for justice to speak, and for the oppressor to bow. The ultimate message of the story: truth can be suppressed, but it can never be extinguished. Dignity can be trampled, but if we hold our faith, it will become a spear that pierces through the darkness. And change doesn't need to start with a crowd. It only takes one person brave enough, like Marcus. One person is bold enough to record the truth, like Carla, and the world will change. Marcus Tate didn't just win justice for himself. He ignited an awakening. A realization that each of us, no matter how small we may seem, can achieve extraordinary things when we steadfastly defend the truth. This summary perfectly encapsulates Marcus's entire journey, powerfully delivers the messages of justice, perseverance, and the strength of truth. Written with elegance and sharpness, leaving a lasting emotional impact.